In a quiet Millfield kitchen, an 82-year-old grandmother was about to make a trust-shattering decision. What started as simple grocery shopping took a devastating turn when she handed her credit card to her beloved grandson. Melissa Jones wasn't your typical retiree. For 37 years, she had shaped young minds as a teacher, known for seeing potential in troubled youth. When Marcus asked for help with errands, she had no idea she was enabling a $3,000 betrayal. Melissa's act of faith would lead to financial ruin and broken trust. What began as family assistance became a painful reckoning that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The arthritis hit worst in the mornings, like clockwork. Melissa Jones sat on the edge of her bed at 6:30, watching her swollen knuckles refuse to cooperate as she reached for the pill organizer on her nightstand. Tuesday meant the big white tablet for blood pressure, the small yellow one for cholesterol, and the horse pill that was supposed to help with the inflammation that turned her hands into gnarled branches every dawn. She'd arranged the pills the night before, as she had every Sunday for the past 15 years since Harold passed. Back then, it had been his pills too. Diabetes medication, heart pills, the blood thinners that hadn't been enough in the end. Now it was just hers. A rainbow of pharmaceutical hope that cost more each month than she'd spent on groceries for a family of 4 back in 1985. The house creaked around her as she made her way to the kitchen, each step a negotiation between her hip and the hardwood floors Harold had insisted on installing when Marcus was just a baby. "These floors will outlast us both," he'd said, running his hands over the smooth oak. He'd been wrong about the first part, right about the second. Coffee first, then the pills. That was the routine. But as she stood at the counter, measuring out the grounds with shaking hands, her mind drifted to last Tuesday's disaster at Peterson's Market. She could still feel the sharp bite of embarrassment, the way her legs had given out in the cereal aisle, sending her groceries scattering across the linoleum while shoppers pretended not to stare. The young manager, probably not much older than Marcus, had been kind enough, helping her up, gathering her scattered coupons. But the look in his eyes had been the worst part. That careful, gentle concern reserved for the very old, the very fragile. "I'm not fragile," she'd wanted to tell him. "I raised 3 children and buried a husband, and took in my grandson when no one else would. I taught 8th grade for 37 years, and never missed a day except when Marcus had pneumonia. But sitting in that grocery store office, filling out an incident report while they checked her for injuries, she'd felt every one of her 82 years pressing down on her shoulders like a wool coat in summer." The coffee maker gurgled to life, and she shuffled back toward the bedroom to check on Marcus. His door was closed, of course, though she could hear the faint sound of his phone buzzing against the nightstand. At 24, he still slept like a teenager, sprawled across the bed with pillows on the floor and yesterday's clothes in a heap by the dresser. She knocked gently. "Marcus? Breakfast?" A grunt from inside, then silence. 5 years now since the accident. 5 years since her son David and his wife Sarah had been driving home from their anniversary dinner. 5 years since the drunk driver had turned her world upside down in the span of a phone call. Marcus had been 19 then, a sophomore at the community college with plans to transfer to state for engineering. Smart boy. Always had been. But grief had a way of derailing even the smartest trains. "The job fair is today," she called through the door, louder this time. "Remember? You circled it on the calendar." "I know, Grandma. I'll be up in a minute." She'd heard that before. Usually a minute meant closer to 2 hours, by which time any job fair worth attending would be picked clean of opportunities. But she'd learned not to push too hard. Marcus had his father's stubborn streak, and David had never responded well to nagging either. Back in the kitchen, she pulled out her worn spiral notebook and flipped to the grocery list she'd started 3 days ago. Milk, bread, the generic brand of cereal that didn't taste quite right but cost half as much as the name brand. Cat food for Whiskers, though the old tabby barely ate anymore. Prescription pickup, the big expense that made her stomach clench every month. She studied the list, calculating prices in her head. The Social Security check had arrived yesterday. $1,247 for the month. Rent took $600 of that. Utilities another $180 if she was careful. The pills were $340, thanks to Medicare's coverage gaps. That left her $127 for everything else: food, gas, the little emergencies that seemed to crop up more frequently as both she and the house aged. The front door squeaked open, and she looked up to see Maggie Foster peering through the screen, her gray hair still in curlers. "Morning, honey. You feeling up to the store today? I'm heading over to pick up my prescriptions anyway." Melissa felt the familiar flush of pride and shame battling in her chest. Maggie meant well, had meant well for the 30 years they'd been neighbors, but accepting help felt like admitting defeat. "I'm fine, Maggie. Marcus can drive me later." Maggie's expression suggested she knew exactly how reliable Marcus's promises had been lately, but she just nodded. "Well, you call if you change your mind. I'll be leaving around 10. After Maggie left, Melissa sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and stared at the grocery list. The truth was, she wasn't sure she could manage another shopping trip alone. The cart was too heavy when full, too unwieldy for her arthritic hands. The aisles seemed to stretch longer each week, and the checkout lines moved too fast for her to keep up with the cashier's questions about paper or plastic, credit or debit. But asking Marcus to drive her meant admitting he'd have to take time off work, except he'd been between opportunities for 3 weeks now, spending his days on his phone or disappearing for hours without explanation. And asking him to push the cart, to help her navigate the store, felt too much like broadcasting her helplessness to the whole neighborhood. The sound of shower water running upstairs gave her hope. Maybe he really would make it to the job fair this time. 20 minutes later, Marcus appeared in the kitchen, his dark hair still damp, wearing the button-down shirt she'd ironed for him the night before. At 24, he still had his father's lean build and easy smile, the kind of natural charm that had gotten David out of trouble more times than she could count. "Morning, Grandma." He kissed her cheek, smelling like soap and the cologne she'd bought him for Christmas. "Coffee smells good. There's eggs if you want them. And I made your lunch." She gestured toward the brown bag on the counter, packed with a sandwich and the cookies she'd baked Sunday night. "You don't have to do that." But he took the bag anyway, the same dance they performed most mornings. "I might grab something with Trevor after the job fair." She watched him pour coffee into the travel mug she'd gotten free with 10 grocery store visits, the handle slightly cracked but still functional. Everything in this house had to last, had to be repaired and reused until it couldn't serve anymore. She'd learned that lesson the hard way in the years after Harold's death, when her teacher's pension and Social Security had to stretch to cover what 2 incomes used to handle. Marcus. She hesitated, then pulled her wallet from her purse. The credit card sat in its slot, barely used except for emergencies. She'd gotten it years ago on Harold's insistence. "Just in case, Mel. You never know," but had been afraid to use it much. The interest rates were predatory, designed to trap people like her who couldn't pay off balances quickly. "I was thinking, maybe you could pick up groceries today, after the job fair?" She held out the card, her fingers trembling slightly. "I made a list, nothing fancy, just the basics. Try to keep it under $150. Marcus looked surprised, then pleased. "Sure, Grandma, no problem." He took the card without really looking at it, sliding it into his wallet next to his driver's license. "I'll take care of everything." There was something in his tone, a casual confidence that should have been reassuring but instead made her chest tighten with anxiety. She'd raised 3 children and knew the difference between responsible assurance and empty promises. But what choice did she have? She couldn't keep struggling through shopping trips, couldn't keep pretending her body wasn't betraying her in small ways every day. "The list is on the counter." "And Marcus?" She waited until he looked at her. $150. That has to last us 2 weeks. "I got it, Grandma. Don't worry." He kissed her cheek again, grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. "I'll see you tonight. Wish me luck at the job fair." She watched through the window as he backed her old Honda out of the driveway, the car she'd taught him to drive in this same driveway 5 years ago. He'd been a quick learner then, eager to master 3-point turns and parallel parking. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being eager to master the harder things: responsibility, Follow through, the art of keeping promises to people who loved you. The house fell quiet around her, filled only with the tick of the mantel clock and Whiskers purring from his sunny spot by the window. She looked at the grocery list on the counter, written in her careful teacher's handwriting. Milk, 2%, bread, wheat, eggs, large, dozen, chicken breasts, family pack, rice, generic, green beans, canned, apples, Gala, 3 pounds, cat food, Whiskers brand, laundry detergent, small, prescriptions, simple things, necessary things. The foundation of a life built on careful budgeting and small sacrifices. She settled into Harold's old recliner with her second cup of coffee and tried to shake the feeling that she'd just made a mistake. Marcus was a good boy, just unfocused. This would be good for him, a chance to prove he could handle responsibility. And it would be good for her, too, a chance to rest her aching joints and trust that the grandson she'd raised could take care of the simple task of grocery shopping. Outside, Mrs. Peterson's dog began barking at the mailman, the same daily drama that had played out for years. Normal sounds of a normal morning in a neighborhood where she'd lived most of her adult life, where she'd raised her children and buried her husband, and now found herself raising a grandchild who sometimes felt like a stranger. The credit card was gone from her wallet, tucked safely in Marcus's pocket, along with her list and her trust. For the first time in months, she wouldn't have to navigate crowded aisles, or struggle with heavy bags, or feel the weight of other people's polite concern. She closed her eyes and tried to enjoy the quiet morning, tried not to think about how much she was trusting to a young man who still forgot to take out the trash without reminders. Marcus's hand tightened on the steering wheel as he drove past Millfield Shopping Center. Grandma's grocery list crumpled on the passenger seat beside him. The job fair had been a bust. 20 other guys his age crowding around the same 3 booths, all offering minimum wage positions that barely covered gas money. But that wasn't what had his pulse racing now. It was the jewelry store. Goldstein and Sons sat tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax office, its modest storefront hiding the treasure that had been haunting his dreams for 3 weeks. The ring, 3 carats of brilliant cut diamonds set in white gold, displayed in the window like a promise of everything he wanted his life to become. Everything Sophia deserved. He'd discovered it by accident, walking past after another failed job interview. The way the light caught the stone had stopped him cold, made him press his face against the glass like a kid at a candy store. When the elderly jeweler had invited him inside, Marcus had learned the price, $3,000. Might as well have been $3 million. But now, he pulled into the parking lot, his grandmother's credit card burning like a coal in his wallet. Just to look, he told himself. Just to see it one more time before some other guy with actual money swept it away. The memory hit him as he sat in the idling Honda. Last weekend at Trevor's barbecue, when Sophia had been talking to her friend Emma about Emma's engagement ring, the way Sophia's eyes had lingered on the modest solitaire, her voice carefully neutral as she said, "It's beautiful." Then Emma had mentioned her fiancé's job at the engineering firm, his promotion, the down payment he'd saved for their house. Marcus had seen something flicker across Sophia's face then. Not jealousy exactly, but comparison. The kind of look that made his chest tight, with the knowledge that he had nothing to offer except promises and potential. At 24, he was still sleeping in his childhood bedroom, still dependent on his grandmother's generosity, still figuring things out while his girlfriend worked double shifts to pay for pre-med classes. "You okay?" Sophia had asked later, finding him alone by the grill. "Yeah, just thinking." He'd pulled her close, breathed in the vanilla scent of her shampoo. "About us. About our future." She'd smiled then, but it hadn't quite reached her eyes. "We've got time, Marcus. No rush." "No rush." The words had felt like a dismissal, a gentle way of saying she wasn't holding her breath. Now sitting outside Goldstein and Sons, Marcus could practically hear Trevor's voice in his head. "Dude, you've been together 6 months. Chill out." But Trevor didn't understand. Trevor hadn't seen the way Sophia's ex-boyfriend Derek had looked at their college graduation. Confident, established, already talking about medical school and 5-year plans. Trevor hadn't been there when Derek had congratulated Sophia on getting into pre-med, his hand lingering on her shoulder like he still had claim to her success. Marcus had tried to contribute to that conversation, mentioned his own plans to go back to school, maybe finish his engineering degree. But the words had sounded hollow even to him, dreams deferred by grief and confusion and the comfortable safety of his grandmother's house. The jeweler, Mr. Goldstein, looked up with recognition as Marcus entered the store. Back again? Still thinking about the ring? Marcus nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Could I see it again? The old man's eyes were kind, but knowing as he unlocked the display case. It's a beautiful piece. The young lady, she'll be very happy. The ring sat in Marcus's palm like captured starlight. He could picture it on Sophia's finger, could imagine her face when he dropped to one knee. This wasn't just jewelry. It was proof. Proof that he was serious about their future. Proof that he could provide for her. Proof that he was worth choosing over someone like Derek. I'll take it, Marcus heard himself say. Mr. Goldstein raised an eyebrow. It's $3,000, son, plus tax. Marcus's wallet felt heavy in his pocket. Grandma's credit card, trusted to him for groceries and necessities. $150, she'd said. Make it last 2 weeks. I have a credit card, Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. He was already calculating. He'd get a job soon. Had to get a job soon. He could pay Grandma back before she even noticed. Maybe work extra hours, pick up side jobs. She hardly used the credit card anyway, probably wouldn't even check the statement for weeks. And Sophia. God, Sophia would say yes. She had to say yes. This ring would show her he was serious, that he could step up, that he was worth waiting for. Let me get the paperwork, Mr. Goldstein said, his voice careful. This is your card? You're Marcus Jones? For a split second, Marcus hesitated. The card had his grandmother's name on it, Melissa Jones, but they had the same last name, and Mr. Goldstein was already running it through the machine. Family card, Marcus mumbled, signing the receipt with hands that barely shook. The ring box felt impossibly light in his pocket as he drove to Peterson's Market afterward, Grandma's grocery list now a crumpled afterthought. He grabbed the basics. Milk, bread, some canned goods, spending exactly $47 of her money to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Tonight, he'd take Sophia to their spot by the river. He'd tell her he loved her, that he wanted to build a life with her, that this ring was just the beginning of all the things he planned to give her. She'd cry, happy tears, and say yes. And for once in his life, he'd be the guy with the plan, the guy who made things happen. The guilt tried to surface as he drove home, but Marcus pushed it down. Grandma would understand eventually. She'd been young once, had been in love. She'd married Grandpa Harold when she was barely 22, had built a whole life on love and faith and taking chances. This was his chance. His moment to prove he was ready to be the man Sophia deserved. The ring box pressed against his leg through his pocket, and Marcus smiled despite the knot in his stomach. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, he'd be engaged to the most amazing woman in the world. The groceries could wait until tonight. Right now, he had a proposal to plan. The credit card statement arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between a coupon circular and a medical bill. Melissa almost set it aside with the junk mail. She rarely used the card, kept it mainly for Harold's old peace of mind. But something made her pause, maybe the thickness of the envelope, or the way her arthritic fingers fumbled with the seal. She unfolded the statement at her kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose. The first few lines were, routine. Previous balance 0, payment 0, new charges, $3,247. 83. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, certain she'd misread the numbers. But there it was, stark black ink on white paper. Goldstein & Sons Jewelry minus $3,247. 83. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, sending lukewarm liquid across the statement. She dabbed frantically with a dish towel, her hands shaking so violently the paper tore at the corner. A mistake. Had to be a mistake. She called the credit card company with fumbling fingers, her voice trembling as she explained to the patient representative that there'd been an error, that she'd never spent $3,000 at a jewelry store. The transaction was approved with the card present, ma'am, signed for by... Papers rustled. Marcus Jones. Same last name. Family member, perhaps? The phone felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Could you repeat the date? Tuesday, October 15th. 2:30 p.m. Tuesday. The day she'd given Marcus her card for groceries. She hung up without saying goodbye, staring at the statement until the numbers began to blur together. $3,000. Nearly 3 months of her Social Security check. Money she didn't have, couldn't afford, would never be able to pay back. The front door opened with its familiar squeak. Marcus's voice called out cheerfully, "Grandma, I'm home!" She couldn't answer. Couldn't form words around the stone lodged in her throat. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his work shirt from the electronics store, looking pleased with himself. On his face was an expression she hadn't seen in months. Genuine happiness, excitement. "You'll never guess what happened today," he started, then stopped when he saw her face. "Grandma, what's wrong?" She held up the statement with shaking hands. Watched his expression shift from confusion to recognition to something that might have been shame, if she was being generous. "I can explain," he said quickly. $3,000. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Marcus, $3,000. He sat down across from her, reaching for her hands. She pulled them away. "I know how it looks, but Grandma, I'm engaged." Sophia said yes. He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of a tearful young woman holding up a glittering ring. "Isn't it beautiful? Isn't she beautiful?" Melissa stared at the screen, then at her grandson's expectant face. "You bought an engagement ring. With my credit card. I'm going to pay you back. I swear, Grandma, I got promoted to full-time yesterday, and full-time at $8 an hour." The words came out flat, mathematical. "That's $320 a week, before taxes." She watched him do the calculation, saw the moment reality began to crack through his excitement. "I'll get a second job. Do you know what $3,000 means to me?" She stood up slowly, her hip protesting. "That's my medication for 9 months, Marcus. That's groceries for half a year." His face had gone pale. "I didn't think. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "No." Her chest felt tight, pressure building behind her sternum. "You didn't think. You never think." The kitchen spun slightly. She gripped the table edge, breathing hard. "Grandma, please sit down. You don't look good." She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time saw not her beloved grandson, but a stranger. Someone who could take her trust and spend it on jewelry without a second thought. "Get out," she whispered. "What?" "Get out of my kitchen." The words hung between them like broken glass, sharp and irreparable. Marcus stumbled out of his grandmother's kitchen, the broken glass of her words still cutting through him. He sat on the front porch steps, his phone clutched in trembling hands, staring at the photo of Sophia's tear-streaked face from 3 nights ago. The memory felt contaminated now, tainted by the look of devastation in his grandmother's eyes. 2 blocks away, Maggie Foster was selecting produce at Peterson's Market when she overheard the conversation that would change everything. "Did you see the rock on that girl's finger?" Casey, the young cashier, was saying to her coworker during a lull between customers. "That Marcus Jones kid was in here bragging about it yesterday. 3 carats, he said. Must have cost a fortune." Maggie's grip tightened on a bag of apples. Marcus Jones. Melissa's grandson. The same Marcus who'd been between jobs for weeks. "How's he afford something like that?" the other cashier asked. "Thought he was broke. Said he used his grandma's credit card. Called it a, quote, family investment." Casey laughed. Kids got some nerve. The apples tumbled from Maggie's numb fingers, rolling across the linoleum. A family investment. She thought of Melissa counting pills at her kitchen table, of the way her friend's face had aged in the months since taking Marcus in full-time. 20 minutes later, Sophia Chen was studying in the campus library when her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Emma. "Girl, you need to see this. Marcus is at Java Junction telling everyone about the ring." Sophia's stomach clenched. She'd asked Marcus not to make a big deal about the engagement, to keep it quiet until they could tell their families properly. But there he was in Emma's Instagram story, holding court at a corner table, the ring box open for a group of their mutual friends to admire. She drove to the coffee shop with growing dread, finding Marcus exactly where Emma had filmed him. His face lit up when he saw her. "Sophia, come show everyone the ring." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "Can we talk? Outside?" The parking lot conversation lasted 15 minutes. Sophia had always prided herself on being direct, a trait that served her well in pre-med classes but sometimes felt brutal in relationships. Now it felt necessary. "Where did the money come from, Marcus?" He looked confused by her tone. "I told you, I've been saving $3,000 on part-time retail wages." Her voice was steady, clinical. "While living rent-free with your grandmother who can barely afford her medications." She watched the color drain from his face. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that you lied to me." She pulled the ring off her finger, held it out to him. "This isn't ours, Marcus. This is stolen. I didn't steal anything. I used my family's credit card, without permission, for $3,000. She pressed the ring into his palm. From an 82-year-old woman on a fixed income. The ring box snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. Across town, Dr. Patricia Williams was reviewing Melissa's file when her patient appeared for her regularly scheduled appointment, looking like she'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. "Your blood pressure is elevated," Dr. Williams said, removing the cuff from Melissa's arm. "Are you taking your medication as prescribed?" Melissa's laugh was hollow. "When I can afford it." Something in her tone made Dr. Williams look up from her chart. She'd known Melissa for 15 years, had treated her through Harold's death and the stress of taking in Marcus. She'd never heard that particular note of defeat in her patient's voice. "Melissa, what's going on?" The story came out in fragments. The grocery shopping, the credit card, the jewelry store charge that had maxed out her account and left her unable to afford her prescriptions. Dr. Williams listened with growing concern, recognizing the classic signs of elder financial abuse. "Have you reported this to anyone? Adult Protective Services? The police?" "He's my grandson." Melissa's voice was barely audible. "He's all I have left." Dr. Williams made careful notes, her professional obligation warring with her compassion for the woman who'd helped her own children through middle school English. The law was clear about her duty to report suspected abuse, but the gray area of family exploitation made every case uniquely heartbreaking. Meanwhile, Maggie Foster stood at her kitchen window, watching Melissa's house through the gap in their shared hedge. She'd seen Marcus leave that morning with a duffel bag, had watched Melissa sitting motionless on her porch for hours afterward. The phone felt heavy in her hands as she dialed Adult Protective Services. 30 years of friendship weighed against her growing fear that Melissa was in over her head, that love and loyalty were blinding her to the reality of her situation. "I'd like to report suspected elder abuse," she heard herself say, the words feeling like betrayal even as she spoke them. By evening, the ripples had spread through their small community like cracks in ice. Marcus sat in his car outside Trevor's apartment, too ashamed to go inside and explain why he'd shown up with a suitcase. Sophia was at her parents' house, trying to explain to her mother why she'd returned an engagement ring. Dr. Williams was filling out mandatory reporting forms at her office. And Melissa sat alone in her kitchen, staring at a credit card statement she couldn't pay, wondering how love had become such an expensive, devastating thing. The phone rang once, then twice. She let it go to voicemail, unable to face whatever new complication awaited her. Outside, the autumn wind scattered leaves across her yard like pieces of a life she no longer recognized. The Adult Protective Services caseworker arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, her sedan pulling into Melissa's driveway with the quiet authority of official business. Sarah Martinez was younger than Melissa had expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes that had seen too much and a manila folder thick with documentation. "Mrs. Jones? I'm Sarah Martinez. We spoke on the phone." Melissa had been dreading this moment since Maggie's awkward confession 3 days earlier. Her neighbor had stood on the porch with tears in her eyes, explaining how she'd overheard the grocery store gossip, how she'd felt compelled to make the report. "I'm so sorry, Mel, but I was scared for you." $3,000. Now Melissa sat across from Sarah at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd opened the credit card statement that had shattered her world. The caseworker's questions were gentle but thorough, each one a small cut that deepened her humiliation. "Has Marcus ever taken money from you before?" Not exactly." Melissa's hands twisted in her lap. "Sometimes he'd borrow $20 for gas, or I'd give him grocery money. But he always said he'd pay it back." Sarah made notes on her tablet. "And did he? Pay it back?" The silence stretched between them. They both knew the answer. "Mrs. Jones, I know this is difficult, but I need you to understand that what happened with the credit card, that's financial exploitation. It's a form of elder abuse. He's not abusive." The words came out sharper than Melissa intended. "Marcus is a good boy. He made a mistake. A $3,000 mistake that's left you unable to afford your medications." Sarah's voice remained neutral, professional. "When did you last fill your prescriptions?" Melissa looked away. The pill organizer on the counter sat empty, had been empty for 4 days now. She'd been rationing what was left, cutting her blood pressure pills in half, skipping the expensive arthritis medication entirely. "I'm managing." "Mrs. Jones, your doctor contacted our office. She's concerned about your health, about what might happen if you can't afford your medications." Of course Patricia had called. Melissa should have expected that. 30 years of friendship didn't disappear just because of professional obligations. "What happens now?" Melissa asked quietly. Sarah consulted her notes. "We have several options. We can help you file a police report, which might allow you to dispute the charges with your credit card company. We can also connect you with legal aid services, help you explore your options for recovering the money." He'd go to jail. Not necessarily. Often these cases are handled as civil matters, especially when family members are involved. The goal isn't punishment, it's protection and recovery. Melissa thought of Marcus, probably sleeping on Trevor's couch, too ashamed to come home. She thought of David at that age, cocky and careless, but never malicious. The grief hit her fresh, sharp as the day she'd gotten the phone call about the accident. "He lost his parents," she said suddenly. 5 years ago. Car accident. I know that doesn't excuse what he did, but he's been lost ever since." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Trauma can explain behavior without excusing it, Mrs. Jones. And grief doesn't give anyone the right to exploit the people who love them." The word exploit landed like a slap. Melissa flinched, remembering Marcus at 8 years old, climbing into her lap during thunderstorms. Marcus, at 16, teaching her how to use the computer Harold had bought but never understood. Marcus, at 19, standing in her kitchen the night of the funeral, looking like a lost child. "What if I don't want to press charges?" "That's your choice. But Mrs. Jones, the debt is still there. The credit card company will expect payment with interest. If you can't pay..." Sarah didn't need to finish. Melissa understood the implications. Ruined credit, collection calls, possibly losing the house that had been her anchor through 30 years of marriage and 5 years of widowhood. A soft knock interrupted them. Through the screen door, Melissa could see Marcus standing on the porch, his face haggard. He'd lost weight in the past week, his clothes hanging loose. "Grandma, can we talk?" Sarah looked to Melissa, who nodded slowly. Marcus entered the kitchen, his eyes taking in the official-looking woman with her tablet and badge. "APS," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Mr. Jones. Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm here because of concerns about your grandmother's financial well-being. Marcus's face crumpled. He looked at Melissa with desperate eyes. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but I've been thinking, and I have a plan. You had a plan before, Melissa said wearily. To pay me back. To get your life together. To be responsible. Each word felt like lifting a stone. I've heard all your plans, Marcus. This is different. I talked to Mr. Goldstein. He'll take the ring back, give me store credit. It's not the full amount, but it's something. And I got a second job. At minimum wage, Sarah interjected. Even working full-time at both jobs, it would take you over 6 months to pay back $3,000. That's assuming no other expenses, no emergencies, no missed shifts. The mathematics of poverty laid bare. Melissa saw Marcus absorb the numbers, watched reality settle over him like a shroud. Then I'll sell my car, he said desperately. I'll sell everything I have. Grandma, please. Don't let them arrest me. Nobody's talking about arrest, Sarah said carefully. But Mrs. Jones needs to consider her options. This isn't just about the money. It's about trust. About ensuring this doesn't happen again. Melissa looked at her grandson, seeing both the boy she'd raised and the stranger who'd betrayed her. The decision ahead of her would reshape both their lives, would determine whether love was enough to bridge the gap between intention and action, between family loyalty and self-preservation. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal day in a world that no longer felt safe or predictable. The Choice. Part 5. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of Harold's old mantel clock and the whisper of autumn wind against the windows. Melissa studied her grandson's face, searching for traces of the boy who used to help her bake cookies every Sunday, who'd cried in her arms the night his parents died. Show me the ring, she said finally. Marcus fumbled in his jacket pocket, producing the small velvet box. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing the diamond that had cost them both so much. In the harsh kitchen light, it looked smaller somehow, less magical than the symbol of love he'd imagined. Melissa took the box, feeling its weight. $3,000. 3 carats. 3 months of her medication. The numbers swirled in her mind like ingredients in a recipe gone wrong. It's beautiful, she admitted quietly. She must have felt like a princess. She gave it back. Marcus's voice cracked. Sophia gave it back the day she found out where the money came from. Sarah Martinez watched this exchange with professional interest, recognizing the complex dynamics that made elder abuse cases so challenging. Love and manipulation often wore the same face in families torn between loyalty and survival. Mrs. Jones, Sarah said gently, you don't have to decide everything today. But I do need to know, are you safe here? Do you feel comfortable with Marcus in the house? Melissa looked at her grandson, really looked at him. She saw exhaustion in his eyes, genuine remorse in the way his shoulders curved inward. But she also saw something else, a restless desperation that reminded her too much of his father at that age, the same charm that could rationalize any mistake. He's never hurt me, she said carefully. Not physically. Financial abuse is still abuse, Mrs. Jones. The law recognizes. I know what the law says. Melissa's voice carried a teacher's authority, the same tone that had commanded respect from 37 years of 8th graders. But this is my family, my choice. She stood slowly, her arthritis making the movement deliberate. Walking to the window, she gazed out at the yard where Harold had planted roses, where Marcus had learned to ride his bike after moving in with them. When your grandfather died, she said without turning around, I thought about selling this house. It felt too big, too full of memories. But I stayed because it was home. Because leaving felt like giving up on all the love that had happened here. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Grandma, I'm not finished. She turned back to face them both. Sarah, what happens if I press charges? Really. Not the legal possibilities, but what actually happens to boys like Marcus. Sarah chose her words carefully. Often, when family members are involved, and the defendant shows genuine remorse, courts lean toward restitution rather than incarceration. Community service, payment plans, financial counseling. The goal is rehabilitation, not punishment. And if I don't press charges, the debt remains. The credit card company may pursue collection. Your credit will be damaged, which could affect your ability to maintain this house, to handle emergencies. Sarah paused. And without legal intervention, there's no guarantee this won't happen again. Melissa absorbed this, feeling the weight of 82 years pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of Harold, how he would have handled this crisis. He'd been the disciplinarian in their family, the one who set boundaries while she provided comfort. Marcus, she said finally, look at me. He raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed. Do you understand what you've done? Not just the money. Do you understand what you've taken from me? He nodded miserably. Your trust, your security, everything. My independence, she corrected. For 30 years, I've managed on my own. I've made my own decisions, paid my own bills, taken care of my own problems. You've made me helpless. The words hit him like physical blows. She could see him flinch with each one. I want you to leave, she continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Not forever, but until you can prove, really prove, that you understand the weight of what you've done. Where will I go? That's your first adult decision. Figure it out. She turned to Sarah. I want to explore my options, the legal ones. Not to punish him, but to protect myself. And maybe, to save him from himself. Sarah nodded, making notes. I can connect you with victim services, legal aid. We'll help you navigate the process. Marcus stood slowly, defeat written in every line of his body. Grandma, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm so sorry. I know you are, sweetheart, but sorry isn't enough anymore. As he gathered his things, Melissa felt pieces of her heart breaking off like old plaster. Love, she realized, sometimes meant letting go of the very people you'd die to protect. Sometimes it meant choosing survival over sentiment, independence over the familiar comfort of family dysfunction. The front door closed behind Marcus with a quiet click, leaving Melissa alone with Sarah and the weight of a choice that would define the rest of her life. 6 weeks later, Melissa sat in the waiting room of Legal Aid Services, her hands folded over the purse that now contained a police report, credit card dispute forms, and a court date circled in red ink. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, institutional glow that reminded her of the DMV or the Social Security office, places where dignity went to be processed. Mrs. Jones? A young attorney, barely older than Marcus, emerged from an office lined with law books and case files. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I've been reviewing your case. The meeting lasted an hour. Jennifer explained the civil proceedings, the likelihood of recovering at least partial restitution, the protective measures they could put in place. The language was clinical, professional, but underneath it all was a simple truth. Marcus would have to face consequences for what he'd done. The good news, Jennifer said, shuffling through paperwork, is that your credit card company has agreed to remove the interest charges while the dispute is pending. And there are programs that can help with your prescription costs. Melissa nodded, though good news felt like an overstatement. Nothing about the situation felt good. It felt necessary, like surgery or chemotherapy, painful but potentially life-saving. After the appointment, she drove to Peterson's Market, the same store where she'd collapsed in the cereal aisle 2 months ago. This time, she used the motorized cart, swallowing her pride in favor of practicality. The whispers followed her through the aisles. She could feel the weight of neighborhood gossip, the mixture of pity and judgment that came with being the subject of local drama. At the pharmacy counter, she handed over her prescriptions, along with the assistance vouchers Jennifer had helped her obtain. The pharmacist, a kind woman named Linda, who'd filled Harold's medications for years, smiled gently. These should help with the cost, Mrs. Jones. And if you ever need to set up a payment plan, just let me know. The kindness nearly undid her. Melissa blinked hard, focusing on the practical task of organizing pills into weekly compartments. Independence, she was learning, sometimes required accepting help from unexpected places. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was learning his own lessons about consequences and redemption. The studio apartment above the laundromat smelled like industrial detergent and disappointment. But it was his, paid for with earnings from his 2 jobs and a small loan from Trevor's surprisingly understanding parents. The ring sat in its box on his makeshift desk, returned by Mr. Goldstein for 60% of its original value. Store credit, not cash, which meant Marcus's mistake would follow him in the form of jewelry he couldn't afford and didn't need. He tried to explain this to the court-appointed financial counselor, a patient woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd seen countless young people destroy their family's finances through impulse and poor judgment. The ring isn't your biggest problem, she'd told him during their first session. The thinking that led to buying the ring, that's what we need to address. Now Marcus worked 60 hours a week between the electronics store and a weekend job moving furniture. Every dollar beyond basic survival went toward a restitution fund that grew with agonizing slowness. At this rate, it would take 14 months to repay his grandmother fully. 14 months of ramen noodles and secondhand clothes and the crushing weight of knowing he'd traded her security for his own selfish dreams. Sophia had called once, 3 weeks after everything fell apart. She'd gotten into medical school, she told him. Early admission to her top choice. She sounded happy, hopeful about the future in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with loss. "I'm proud of you," he'd said, meaning it completely. "Marcus." She'd started, then stopped. "Take care of yourself, okay?" After she hung up, he'd understood that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, left scars that shaped everything that came after. On Thanksgiving morning, Melissa sat at her kitchen table with Maggie Foster, sharing a meal neither of them had wanted to eat alone. The turkey was smaller than in years past, the guest list reduced to just the 2 neighbors who'd weathered this crisis together. "Any word from Marcus?" Maggie asked carefully. "He sends money every 2 weeks. Never enough, but he sends it." Melissa pushed sweet potatoes around her plate. "The counselor says consistency matters more than amount." Through the window, she could see the Henderson family next door, 3 generations gathered around their dining room table. The sight should have made her sad, should have reminded her of everything she'd lost. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. "I miss him," she admitted. "But I don't miss the worry. The walking on eggshells, wondering what crisis was coming next." Maggie reached across the table, covering Melissa's hand with her own. "That's not terrible, Mel. That's survival." Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, dusting the world in clean white possibility. Inside, 2 women who'd learned hard lessons about love and boundaries shared pie and quiet gratitude for choices that had hurt but ultimately healed. Some families, Melissa was learning, had to break before they could build something stronger. The Slow Return Part 7 spring arrived early that year, coaxing crocuses through the last patches of snow in Melissa's front yard. She knelt on a foam pad, her arthritic hands gentle as she cleared winter debris from around Harold's rose bushes. The physical therapy had helped, twice-weekly sessions paid for through a county program Jennifer Walsh had recommended, and for the first time in months, gardening felt possible rather than punishing. The sound of footsteps on the sidewalk made her look up. A young man was approaching, thin and weathered, carrying a small potted plant. For a moment she didn't recognize him, then her heart stuttered with recognition. Marcus. 7 months had changed him. The soft edges of youth had been worn away by long hours and longer nights of introspection. His clothes were clean but worn, his hair shorter than she remembered. He walked with a different posture now, less swagger, more purpose. "Hi, Grandma." His voice was quiet, uncertain. She sat back on her heels, studying his face. "Marcus, I brought you something." He held out the plant. A small lavender bush, already showing purple buds. "I remember you saying you wanted to try growing some. For tea." She accepted the pot without getting up, her joints protesting the awkward position. How did you know I was out here? I've been driving by sometimes. Not stopping, just... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from his childhood. Making sure you were okay. The admission hung between them like morning mist. Melissa felt the familiar tug of protective love warring with the harder-won wisdom of the past months. He looked tired, she thought. Older, but also somehow more solid, less likely to drift away on the next appealing breeze. The restitution check came yesterday, she said finally. On time, like the others. He nodded. Mrs. Chen says consistency builds trust, slowly. She's right. Melissa struggled to her feet, Marcus instinctively moving to help, then stopping himself when she held up a warning hand. Independence remained precious, even from those she loved. Would you like some coffee? The kitchen felt different with both of them in it again, smaller somehow, but also more complete. Marcus sat at the table, not in his old chair, but in the one by the window, where Harold used to read the morning paper. A subtle shift that acknowledged how everything had changed. How's work? Melissa asked, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Good. Hard, but good. Mr. Patterson at the electronics store promoted me to assistant manager. Small raise, but it helps. He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, not quite meeting her eyes. I finished the financial counseling program last month. Learned a lot about budgeting, planning, consequences. She heard the weight behind that last word. And personally? Are you taking care of yourself? For the first time, he smiled. A small, rueful expression that reminded her of David at that age. I have a therapist now, through the Employee Assistance Program. Turns out, grief doesn't just go away because you ignore it. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. They sat in comfortable silence, the morning light streaming through windows she'd finally been able to afford to have cleaned. The credit card debt was nearly gone, a combination of Marcus's payments, legal assistance, and her own careful budgeting. More importantly, her sense of security was slowly returning. I saw Sophia last week, Marcus said suddenly. At the grocery store. She's doing well. Medical school suits her. Melissa waited, sensing there was more. I apologized. Really apologized. Not just the sorry I got caught kind. He stared into his coffee. She was gracious about it. Said she hoped I was learning from my mistakes. Are you? He looked up then, meeting her eyes fully for the first time since arriving. I think so. I hope so. The therapist says recovery from being selfish, I guess. It's not linear. There are setbacks. But I'm trying to do better. Through the window, Melissa could see Maggie Foster working in her own garden, close enough to keep an eye on things but far enough away to allow privacy. 7 months had taught them all about the delicate balance between caring and interfering. The house feels empty without you, Melissa admitted, but it also feels peaceful. Marcus flinched slightly but nodded. I understand. What I did, it wasn't just about money. It was about trust. About making you afraid in your own home. The insight surprised her. This was not the same young man who'd left with a duffel bag and wounded pride. This Marcus understood consequences, had learned to see beyond his own immediate desires. I miss you, she said simply, but I'm not ready for you to move back. Not yet. I know. His voice was steady, accepting. Mrs. Chen says trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through actions, not words. She's right. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Would it be okay if I came by next week to help with the garden? I know it's hard for you to do the heavy work alone. Melissa considered this, weighing her need for independence against the practical reality of aging. Saturday mornings, she said finally. 2 hours. We'll see how it goes. Saturday mornings, he agreed. Thank you, Grandma. After he left, she sat on her front porch with a second cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up around her. Mrs. Peterson's dog barked at the mail carrier, the same daily ritual that had marked her mornings for years. Normal sounds of a normal day in a world that was slowly becoming recognizable again. The lavender plant sat beside her on the porch rail, its purple buds promising fragrance and tea and small pleasures to come. Some gifts, she reflected, were worth accepting, even from those who'd hurt you, especially from those learning to heal themselves. Change was possible. Forgiveness was a process. And love, real love, sometimes meant holding space for people to become better versions of themselves, even when it hurt to watch them try. Saturday morning was 5 days away. She would count them carefully, hope measured against experience, trust rebuilt one consistent action at a time. The Saturday morning routine developed slowly, like a photograph emerging in developer solution. Marcus would arrive at 8:30 sharp, never early enough to seem presumptuous, never late enough to worry her. They'd work in the garden for exactly 2 hours. Then he'd leave without lingering, without pushing for more time than she'd offered. By July, the rhythm had become comfortable. Melissa would have coffee ready, and they'd plan their work while the morning air was still cool. Marcus had learned to read her energy levels, to suggest breaks before her arthritis flared, to handle the heavy lifting without making her feel diminished. "The tomatoes are coming in well," he said one Saturday, kneeling beside the raised bed they'd built together in June. His carpentry skills had improved along with everything else. Measured twice, cut once, no shortcuts. "Should have enough for canning soon." Melissa smiled, remembering the disasters of his teenage years when Harold had tried to teach him basic home repair. Patience, it seemed, was something that came with consequences rather than lectures. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said, then immediately regretted the words. Comparisons to Harold felt dangerous, too weighted with expectation. But Marcus just nodded thoughtfully. "I hope so. I think about him sometimes, wonder what he'd say about everything." "He'd say actions matter more than intentions," Melissa replied after a moment. He was practical that way. They worked, in companionable silence, until Marcus's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then put it away without responding. Another small sign of growth. 6 months ago, any interruption would have derailed his focus entirely. "Everything okay?" Melissa asked. "Trevor's having a barbecue this afternoon. Asked if I wanted to come." Marcus pulled a stubborn weed from between the lettuce plants. "I said maybe." She heard the question underneath his casual tone. Permission, or perhaps reassurance that their Saturday morning wouldn't be affected by his social life. "You should go," she said. "You need friends your own age." "I have friends. At work, mostly." "It's different now, though." He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hard to relate to people who haven't messed up the way I did." This was new territory. In their careful reconstruction of relationship, they'd avoided discussing the deeper emotional work Marcus was doing in therapy, but something in his voice suggested he needed to talk. "What does Dr. Rodriguez say about that?" she asked, referencing the therapist he'd mentioned in passing. That shame can become its own kind of self-indulgence if you're not careful. That at some point, feeling bad about what you did becomes an excuse not to fully engage with life. Marcus pulled another weed, his movements more aggressive now. "She says I need to find ways to connect with people without making my mistakes the center of every conversation." Melissa considered this wisdom, recognizing its truth. She'd seen Marcus retreat into self-flagellation before, using guilt as a shield against further vulnerability. "Your mistakes don't define you," she said carefully. "But neither do they disappear. They become part of your story, the part that teaches you who you want to be." Later, as Marcus was loading his tools into the truck he'd bought with his savings, used, practical, proof of his changed priorities, Melissa made a decision that surprised them both. "Next Saturday," she said, "would you like to stay for lunch? I'm making Harold's pot roast recipe." The invitation hung in the air between them, heavier than its simple word suggested. An extra hour. A shared meal. The first time she'd asked him to stay longer rather than holding firm to their boundaries. Marcus's face went through several expressions. Surprise, hope, careful consideration. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I'd like to try," she corrected. "If it feels wrong, we'll know. But I think maybe it's time." That afternoon, from her kitchen window, Melissa watched Marcus's truck disappear around the corner toward Trevor's house. The sight no longer filled her with anxiety about whether he'd return, whether he'd make good choices, whether he'd remember his responsibilities. Those fears had been replaced by something more sustainable, cautious optimism backed by evidence. The lavender plant he'd brought in spring was thriving now, filling the evening air with fragrance. She'd already dried several small bunches for tea, just as she'd planned. Some gifts, she reflected, took time to fully appreciate. But they were worth the wait. Next Saturday would bring pot roast and careful conversation, another small step in the long journey back to family. Not the family they'd been before, that innocent trust was gone forever, but perhaps something stronger. A relationship built on honest recognition of each other's flaws and capacity for growth. Trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt, but it would always bear the scars of its breaking hairline fractures that served as reminders to handle it more carefully the second time around. The pot roast lunch had gone well, better than well. They'd talked about safe things at first, the garden, Marcus's promotion at work, the neighbor's new baby. But as the afternoon stretched on, their conversation had deepened naturally, touching on memories of Harold, plans for winterizing the house, even Marcus's tentative thoughts about returning to school part-time. It felt, Melissa thought later, like the first normal afternoon they'd shared since before the credit card incident. Not quite the easy intimacy they'd once had, but something new. More careful, perhaps, but also more honest. 2 weeks after that lunch, a letter arrived that would test everything they'd rebuilt. Melissa found it mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements, the return address making her stomach clench. Goldstein & Sons Jewelry. Her hands shook as she opened it, expecting some final bill or legal notice related to Marcus's case. Instead, she found a handwritten note from Mr. Goldstein himself. Dear Mrs. Jones, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out regarding the engagement ring your grandson purchased last year. As you may know, he received store credit when he returned it, but he's never used that credit. Recently, a situation has come to my attention that I thought you should know about. A young woman came into my store last week inquiring about the ring. She said she was Marcus's girlfriend, and that he'd told her about it, described it in detail. She seemed to think he still owned it. I didn't give her any information, of course. Customer privacy is paramount, but I felt you should know that Marcus may not have been entirely truthful with someone about his circumstances. The store credit remains available if he wishes to use it. But given everything that's happened, I thought transparency was more important than business. Sincerely, Morris Goldstein. Melissa read the letter 3 times, her mind racing. A girlfriend. Someone Marcus hadn't mentioned in their careful Saturday conversations. Their slowly rebuilding relationship. Someone he was apparently lying to about his past. About the ring that had cost them both so much. She was still sitting at the kitchen table, letter in hand, when Marcus arrived for their usual garden work. Through the window, she watched him check his phone before getting out of the truck, a gesture that now seemed potentially significant rather than merely habitual. Morning, Grandma, he called through the screen door. Ready to tackle those flower beds? She held up the letter. We need to talk first. The change in his expression was immediate and devastating. The careful confidence he'd built over months seemed to crumble as he read Mr. Goldstein's note, his face going through a familiar progression of emotions. Surprise, guilt, and finally, resignation. Her name is Ashley, he said quietly, sinking into the chair across from her. I met her at work 3 months ago. She's really great, Grandma. Smart, funny, studying to be a nurse. And you told her about the ring. Not about what really happened. I told her I'd bought it for someone else, someone who didn't appreciate it. His voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't tell her about you, about the credit card. I just said it was a relationship that didn't work out. Melissa felt the familiar ache in her chest, the same disappointment that had nearly broken her a year ago. But this time it was layered with something else, a deeper understanding of how shame could twist people into knots. How the fear of judgment could perpetuate the very behaviors that created judgment in the first place. Marcus. Her voice was steady, controlled. Look at me. He raised his head, and she saw tears threatening to spill over. Are you lying to her about other things? Number. Yes. I don't know. He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture more frantic now. I told her I live alone, that I'm independent. I didn't tell her about living above the laundromat, about the restitution payments, about any of it. I wanted her to see me as someone who had his life together. So you're building a relationship on a foundation of lies. The words hit him like physical blows. It's not like that. I really care about her. I wanted a clean start. A chance to be the person I am now, not the person I was. Melissa studied her grandson's face, seeing the boy who'd always taken shortcuts, who'd always looked for the easy way around difficult truths. But she also saw something else. Genuine anguish at being caught in another deception, real fear of losing something that mattered to him. The person you are now, she said carefully, includes the person you were. Your mistakes, your recovery, your growth. That's all part of who you are. If Ashley can't accept that, then she's not the right person for you. But what if she runs? What if she decides I'm too much trouble, too damaged? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. Then she wasn't going to stay anyway, sweetheart. You can't build lasting love on a foundation of deception. I thought I'd taught you that. Marcus was crying now, silent tears that reminded her of the 19-year-old who'd stood in the same kitchen the night his parents died. I just wanted something good. Something untainted by all the mess I made. Life doesn't work that way. Melissa reached across the table, covering his hand with hers, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since his return. Our mistakes become part of our story. The question is whether we let them define us or teach us. They sat in silence for several minutes, the letter between them like evidence in a trial that would determine the future of their relationship. Finally, Marcus spoke. What should I do? You know what you should do. The question is whether you're brave enough to do it. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. Tell her the truth, all of it. And if she leaves, then you'll know you're capable of doing the right thing, even when it costs you something you want. Melissa squeezed his hand gently. That's what integrity looks like, Marcus. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest, especially when honesty is hard. That afternoon, instead of working in the garden, Marcus sat on Melissa's front porch and called Ashley. Melissa couldn't hear the conversation from inside the house, but she could see his body language through the window. Tense at first, then increasingly dejected as the call went on. When he came back inside, his face told her everything she needed to know. She needs time to think, he said simply. She's hurt that I lied, confused about what else might not be true. I don't blame her. Melissa made them both tea, choosing her words carefully. I'm proud of you for telling her, even though it might have ruined everything. Especially because it might have ruined everything. That's when telling the truth matters most. As evening fell, Marcus prepared to leave for his small apartment above the laundromat. At the door, he paused. Grandma? What if I keep making mistakes? What if I never get it right? She considered this question, thinking of her own imperfect life, her own stumbles and recoveries. Then you keep trying to do better. That's all any of us can do. After he left, Melissa sat in Harold's old recliner, Mr. Goldstein's letter still on the kitchen table. Progress, she reflected, wasn't always linear. Sometimes it involved taking steps backward in order to move forward more honestly. The real test wasn't whether Marcus would ever stop making mistakes. It was whether he'd learn to face them with integrity rather than deception. Today's conversation suggested he was finally learning that lesson, painful as it was. Trust, she reminded herself, was rebuilt through moments exactly like this one, when someone chose honesty over self-protection, truth over comfort. Whether Ashley would give Marcus that chance remained to be seen. But for the first time in over a year, Melissa felt certain that her grandson was finally becoming the man she'd always hoped he could be. 3 days passed without word from Ashley. Marcus showed up for their Saturday garden session, looking like he hadn't slept, his usual careful energy replaced by a restless anxiety that made Melissa's chest ache with sympathy. She'd watched him fall apart before, but this felt different. Not the entitled frustration of consequences he couldn't accept, but the genuine grief of someone who'd finally learned the cost of dishonesty. "She texted yesterday," he said while they worked on weeding the herb garden. "Just said she needed more time to process everything." Melissa paused in her work, studying his profile. "That's not a no. It's not a yes either." Marcus pulled a stubborn dandelion, roots and all. "I keep thinking about what you said, about building relationships on lies. She asked me what else I haven't told her, and I realized there's so much. Not just the big stuff, but little things. The way I made my apartment sound nicer than it is, the way I talked about my future like I had it all figured out. And now I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to impress someone." He sat back on his heels, dirt smudged on his hands. "That's what Dr. Rodriguez says we need to work on next. Learning to be comfortable with who I actually am, not who I think people want me to be." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the morning sun warming their backs. Melissa found herself thinking about her own young adulthood, the person she'd been when she met Harold. She'd been so eager to appear mature, sophisticated, worthy of his attention. The difference was, Harold had seen through her pretenses and loved her anyway. "Tell me about Ashley," she said finally. "Not the version you presented to her, but who she actually is." Marcus's face softened for the first time all morning. "She's studying nursing, like I said, but she's doing it while working full-time at a medical billing company and taking care of her little brother 3 nights a week because her mom works doubles at the hospital." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his worried features. "She brings homemade lunches to work every day because she's saving money, but she always packs extra in case someone forgot theirs. She's real, you know? No pretense, no games, just genuinely kind. She sounds wonderful." "She is. That's what makes this so hard. She deserves someone who's honest with her from the beginning, not someone who—" He trailed off, pulling another weed with unnecessary force. "Someone who's learning to be honest," Melissa corrected gently. "Marcus, you're not the same person who bought that ring with my credit card, but you're also not going to become perfect overnight. The question is whether Ashley can accept someone who's still growing." Before Marcus could respond, a car pulled into the driveway. A small silver Honda, unfamiliar but somehow expected. Through the passenger window, Melissa could see a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her expression serious but not unkind. "That's her," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible. Ashley got out of the car slowly, taking in the scene. Marcus kneeling in the dirt, his grandmother beside him in her sun hat and gardening gloves, the modest house with its careful flower beds and vegetable garden. She looked younger than Melissa had expected, maybe 23, with the kind of understated prettiness that came from genuine warmth rather than artifice. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Ashley said, her voice carrying a slight nervousness. "I was hoping we could talk." Marcus started to stand, brushing dirt from his knees, but Ashley held up a hand. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to both of you." Melissa felt her eyebrows rise. This was unexpected but not unwelcome. "Of course, dear. Would you like some iced tea? We can sit on the porch." 10 minutes later, they were arranged on the front porch furniture. Melissa in her usual rocker, Marcus perched on the edge of the swing like he was ready to bolt, Ashley in the wicker chair Harold had bought at a garage sale 15 years ago. The young woman held her glass of tea but didn't drink, her attention focused entirely on Marcus. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Ashley began, her voice steady but careful. "About the ring, about your grandmother, about all of it." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I need to understand something. When you told me about your ex-girlfriend who didn't appreciate the ring, were you talking about your grandmother?" The question hit like a physical blow. Melissa saw Marcus flinch, saw the way he struggled to form words. "No," he said finally. "No, that was about Sophia, my actual ex-girlfriend." She gave the ring back when she found out where the money came from. So there was someone else you hurt with this decision. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. Ashley turned to Melissa then, her expression respectful but direct. Mrs. Jones, I know this is probably uncomfortable, but I need to understand what happened from your perspective. Marcus told me his version, but you want to know if he's still lying, Melissa finished gently. A flush crept up Ashley's neck. I suppose that's exactly what I want to know. Melissa studied this young woman who'd driven over to confront a difficult situation head-on rather than simply walking away. There was something admirable in that approach, something that reminded her of herself at that age. Marcus stole from me, she said simply. Not cash from my purse, but something more insidious. He used my trust and my credit card to buy something I couldn't afford, something that left me unable to pay for my medications. Ashley's face went pale. I didn't realize it was that serious. Financial abuse often is, especially for elderly people on fixed incomes. Melissa kept her voice matter-of-fact, clinical. But Marcus has spent the past year making amends. Not just paying the money back, but doing the harder work of understanding why he made that choice and how to avoid making similar ones. Has he? Made amends, I mean. Melissa looked at her grandson, seeing him through Ashley's eyes, the young man who'd shown up consistently every Saturday for months, who'd rebuilt her garden beds and her trust in small, careful increments. He's trying, she said finally. Really trying. That doesn't erase what he did, but it shows me who he's capable of being. Ashley was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Marcus and Melissa. The lies he told me about his living situation, about his independence, were those to impress me, or were they because he's ashamed of where he is right now? It was a perceptive question, one that went to the heart of Marcus's struggles with honesty. Both, I think, Marcus answered before Melissa could respond. I wanted you to see me as successful, put together. But I was also ashamed of living in that tiny apartment, of having to rebuild my life from scratch because of my own mistakes. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd think I was pathetic. I might have, Ashley said with startling honesty, not because of your circumstances, but because of the lying. I've been lied to before, Marcus. By people who thought they were protecting me or protecting themselves or just making things easier. It never makes things easier. The conversation continued for another hour, ranging over topics Melissa hadn't expected. Ashley's own family struggles, her father's gambling problem that had taught her to recognize deception, Marcus's therapy work, and his plans for returning to school. Through it all, Melissa watched these two young people navigate honesty in real time. Saw them building something fragile but potentially lasting. I can't promise I'm done making mistakes, Marcus said finally. I can't even promise I won't occasionally try to make myself look better than I am. But I can promise that when I catch myself doing it, I'll correct it. And I can promise that the big stuff, the stuff that matters, I'll tell you the truth about that, even when it's hard. Ashley considered this, her expression thoughtful. What about the store credit at the jewelry store? Marcus looked confused. What about it? Mr. Goldstein's letter mentioned that you still have credit there. Almost $2,000 worth. I do. I've never used it. Why not? The question seemed to surprise him. Because it doesn't feel like mine. It feels like stolen money, even though it's just store credit. For the first time since arriving, Ashley smiled. A small, tentative expression that transformed her serious face. That's exactly the right answer. As the afternoon wound down, Ashley prepared to leave. At her car, she turned back to Marcus. I'd like to try again, she said simply. Slowly, honestly, but I need you to understand, if you lie to me again about anything significant, I'm done. Not because I don't care about you, but because I care about both of us too much to build something on a false foundation. After Ashley drove away, Marcus and Melissa sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the evening light fade across the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Mrs. Peterson's grandchildren played in their backyard, their laughter carrying on the warm air. "She's good for you," Melissa said finally. "If I don't mess it up." "You might, probably will in small ways. The question is whether you'll fix it when you do." Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them like a shared language learned through trial and error. "Grandma, thank you. For today, for all of it. For not giving up on me when you had every right to." Melissa reached over and patted his hand, the gesture natural now, in a way it hadn't been for over a year. "Family doesn't give up, sweetheart. It just learns better boundaries." As the stars began to appear overhead, they sat together on the porch of the house that had seen so much love and loss, betrayal and forgiveness, the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust one honest conversation at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose integrity over convenience. But tonight, they were simply grandmother and grandson again, older and warier than before, but somehow stronger for having survived the breaking and rebuilding of their bond. Some stories, Melissa reflected, didn't end with dramatic reconciliations or perfect resolutions. Some stories ended with the quiet satisfaction of people choosing, day after day, to do better than they had before. And perhaps that was the most honest ending of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.